Hello and welcome to this week's episode of #Leadership What's on Your Mind. Remember, a podcast to make you stop and think about your leadership journey by adding value, by bringing amazing guests with amazing stories and experts in their field. So make sure if you haven't already, hit subscribe on the YouTube channel and follow us on your podcast provider. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking to Haydn. How are you doing, Haydn?
I'm really well, Stuart. How are you doing?
Yeah, good, thank you. I've been really looking forward to this because me and Haydn have been connected since the start of the podcast. We almost started Haydn had a podcast started similar time, so we sort of shared the journey early on, which is really exciting. Haydn's doing some amazing things in the field of leadership. He's got an amazing story, amazing career. So without further ado, let's get Haydn. So for the people who don't know you, tell us who you are, what you do, and then we'll get into it. Off we go.
Brilliant, thanks, Stuart. So my name's Haydn Bratt, and I am the founder and originator of a business called Mindset Leadership. So we work in two kind of areas that are linked to the name, which is we help people with their thinking and their mindset so they can become better leaders and focus on leadership. And our real focus now is working with small business owners. So we work with entrepreneurs, small business owners, people who are out there striving to make a difference in the world, and we help them to think how they can do that more effectively in their businesses so they can fulfill their goals and their ambitions.
Yeah, amazing. And again, we're going to dig into how you got there, because I love your story of how you got there. It's amazing. So we ask every guest, obviously, we're #leadership, what's on your mind? What does come to your mind when you hear the word leadership?
It's a great question. The thing that comes to my mind is movement.
Okay.
Because when I think about leadership, I think about you're moving somebody somewhere, whether it's emotionally, physically, mentally, spiritually. You're trying to create a movement in somebody, a shift in their views or a shift in where they are. And that for me is leadership, is you're leading somebody somewhere different. And so I always think that leadership is about movement. It's about creating a shift in the people you engage with. And that's what comes to my mind. That's the thing I always think about.
Excellent. Do you know what I love? I think this is going to be episode 71, and everybody has a unique little, you think there are definitions out there, aren't there?
Yeah.
But I love everybody has their own piece, and I suppose it goes to everybody's individual leadership journey as well, I suppose.
Yeah.
So let's stay with you to start off with. However far back we go, whether it's on reflection or there was a light bulb moment at the time, where do you think your leadership journey started?
So it's a really interesting question to think about. So what comes to mind is there was an instance when I was at university. So I was studying business at university, and I was working, as you do, with various projects and things. And there was a conversation I had with a friend of mine, was still in contact with too many years later. And we were talking about our roles within the projects that we run, just kind of probably having a beer, kicking time around. And what this person said, Stephen, he said to me is, we do two very different things within the project teams. He said, I'm really task focused. I really make sure that we get things done. And he called me a social leader. He called me because he said, you're the one who draws people together and makes sure everybody's all right within the project team. I get really focused on making sure we hit the deadline, but you're the person who really kind of almost the glue that makes it work, and you connect with people, you engage with people. And he said, you're just this social leader. And he actually said, I wish I was more like you. And I was sitting there thinking, well, actually, I probably do with being a bit more like you. So seeing those different, like that was probably the first time that it was really kind of called out around that conversation about what my own leadership style was.
Brilliant. And do you know, like, just to sort of make you think even before that, what do you think, what experiences or exposures did you think gave you the awareness to be like that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I think, actually, if I go back to when I was very, very young, my dad was an entrepreneur, and I always used to spend my holidays going to work with my dad. So this would be back in the early 80s. I would literally spend holidays dressed in a little suit. I was probably 5 or 6 at the time, dressed in a suit, out in the car with my dad, traveling around all of these places and going into, my dad was in the carpet industry for many years, and going into these, either the shop that he owned or other people's shops, and you're talking to grown-ups. and you're engaging. And I used to just listen to the conversations. And that's one of my earliest memories as a child, was going to work with my dad and then being really fascinated by these places, the people he met, and seeing that connection. And my dad's always been a very good connector. That's one of the things that I've got from my dad, I guess, is that ability to connect with people. And that really, I think that's where it originated from, knowing that actually the better relationships you build, the more you can influence what happens next. And and the more movement you can create, going back to my definition of leadership. So that's where it starts from.
Do you know what? That's amazing, because when you said that, a first example, it's that we can have a whole conversation about nature and nurture, but you can see that there was two people there with quite different leadership styles. And again, if we ask the other person about what their experience to get to that point, that's why I asked the question, because I thought, wonder what made you, it wasn't like you just suddenly became that person. Right, excellent. So tell us a little bit about your career from then. Obviously you started with the university example, but tell us a bit like what you did in business, in the corporate world, that built the skills and the learning to be really interested in leadership in the first place. But I know that you were good at it, so tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I started, I left university and I kind of fell into retail. It was, I was actually studying in Holland for 6 months, which is a fantastic opportunity. And because I was studying over there, I needed to sort out some work placement. So I did a sandwich course where you have to do a year in industry. And I applied to some businesses. And the first one that responded was Tyrac, the retailer from back in the day. So I took it without any second thoughts. And I had such a great time in London over the course of that year that I came back and rejoined them. So it was frontline retail, operational retail. But right from almost day one in there, I was drawn to the people side of running a store or running a shop. So I always wanted to get involved in the training in the stores. I always wanted to kind of manage the rotoring and look after the people side rather than the standards or the displays. I could do all that stuff, but it wasn't my passion. And so I gradually got more and more drawn towards that side of the business. And I then, through a couple of moves, different retail businesses, got drawn into a company, actually a company called Futon Company, which again were a really growing business in the early 90s or mid 90s. And they didn't have any training at all. So they had no corporate training, no real structures or processes. So they said, come on board and you can set it up. So I had this opportunity to create something from absolutely nothing based on what I'd experienced and what I'd learned. So I was like, brilliant, this will be great. So I went and joined them, and I started with some real operational training and then gradually increased that to kind of do a lot more of the management training. And as part of that, I thought, well, actually, I got my degree, I got my experience, but probably needed a little bit more knowledge to be able to do this effectively, because I just needed a bit of validation that what I was doing was right. So I then went and did my CITB qualification, so certificate in training practice with the CIPD, get my letters right, and did my qualification with them, got that kind of validation really that I was doing, and learned a lot from doing that qualification. So then I built this, and that's where I first got interested in the leadership side, because I've done a lot of operational training. I was working with store teams, a lot of tactical level training. But then I started to notice some store managers really kind of created great stores, and there was something different. Again, probably back to that task versus social leadership element. What was it that made certain store managers really great, and where some of the store managers really struggled? And I wanted to try and see how can we kind of work with those great store managers to draw out what they do so we can teach other people how to do it. And that was really the kind of start. So I set up an academy within the head office of Futon Company, and we started to create some management development content. And that was, I've always had a passion for writing as well. So I talk about leadership in movement. One of my passions is how do I create the movement in somebody's behaviors through teaching, inspiring, working with people so they become something different on the back of the work we do. So I was really passionate about designing great content. So I did that, set that up. Then I had an opportunity to rejoin Tyrac, but this time as the national training manager rather than just working in a store. So had an opportunity for a business that actually was whilst I was responsible for UK, they had an international business as well. So I was responsible for kind of the global training at the end of that time with them. And then I took a step through that into another kind of retail business, but very different retail business, which was the gaming industry. So I was invited, I love sport. So right from when I was a kid, I loved sport. I was invited to, through a headhunter, to go and speak to the people at Coral because they were looking for a training manager. So for me, it was this, okay, I'm not a gambling man, and actually my background has never really been into gambling, but it's an opportunity to combine sport with leadership, which for me was just a perfect combination. And I joined them, and I've got to say, they were, at the time when I joined, they were an absolutely brilliant business with a great leadership team, led by a guy called Will Forsh, who was a really interesting leader, but had a very committed team underneath him. And for me to get into that group and start working with that team was fascinating and really, really rewarding, really beneficial. And so I started to really up-level my understanding of leadership, because now working with a big corporate with some real big hitters who were, able to move on from there. The people who've left that business have gone to much bigger roles across different industries. So working with some really talented leaders, and that gave me an opportunity to really kind of up-level my own skills, really invest in my own understanding. So I started to do a lot more research, a lot more learning around leadership at that time. And then I was put at the risk of redundancy because the business was taken over by Gala and they started to centralize everything. So my role was actually made redundant. And I was offered the role of resourcing rather than learning and development. And that really wasn't for me. So I love resourcing as a function. It does for the business, attracting great people into the business and talent management. But my real passion was the leadership development and the training side. And it just so happened that a really good friend of mine told me that William Hill were looking for, in effect, the same position that I'd just done for Coral. And William Hill was a much bigger business, 2,500 locations, 14,000 colleagues, a big role to go and step into. And I was fortunate to get the role at William Hill and joined them. And then I spent the next 7 years of my career working in William Hill. So again, sport, people, the introduction of online business, online marketing came into it. But it was just, again, another level in terms of the types of leaders I was working with. And at the time, it was led by an individual who'd been in the business for 42 years and had gone from man and boy to become CEO, and seeing some of his attributes and some of the ways that he led such a large, rapidly growing multinational business was fascinating. So that's what led me through. And then I got to a point where I just decided that I'd love to do this for myself. So my dad was an entrepreneur. That entrepreneurial spark was sitting in the back of my thoughts and had been there for a while. It was kind of a bit of an itch that I was, an itch that I just needed to scratch. And eventually I got to the point where I kind of built the confidence to say, okay, it's now time to do this. And really that was, I want to do it. If I don't do it now, I might never do it. And if I never do it, I'd really look back and think, if only, and I'd hate that. So so I took the step out to set my own business up, which was 7.5 years ago. And through that, I still work with corporate organizations, but my real passion has brought me to working with entrepreneurs and new business owners, because I talk about movement. The best place to see that movement happen is in smaller businesses, where the impact you have on one person is far more magnified than it is within a large organization where there might be 10, 15,000 people. So that's what's drawn me to that.
That's good. And I'm really excited now, because I'd heard that bits of that a few, probably 18 months ago when we were fully connected. But I'm really excited now to sort of, obviously you've identified your habits of leadership. And obviously, hopefully the audience can tell that comes from a massive credibility piece of where you started and those levels. You can almost picture those levels as you talk about them. It's an amazing journey. So what have you identified as your habits of leadership?
Yeah, thank you. Great question. So in 2018, I wrote my book, Micro Leadership, and that came on the years of all of this study of great leaders. And I identified 6 habits that really came to the fore and were consistently showed up within the leaders that I'd seen who were excelling, people who were great performance. I'm also really passionate, as I know you are, on peak performance and inspiring people from different genres, sports, sciences, the arts, all of these peak performers. And so what I identified was six habits. The first one was what I call living the gap, which is this ability to spot the opportunities to work at the edge of things, to challenge convention, to think differently about things. So living the gap is that real forward focus. Second one was be a connector. Goes back to my social leadership things about how do you draw people into you and build connections from people to processes to systems. Third one is find a way, which is that real tenacity, resilience, ability to fight past problems to get to the outcome that you're trying to achieve. The fourth one is dare to fail, so that willingness to take risks, to put yourself at the edges, to challenge yourself to do things new or step into arenas where you might not succeed and still do it anyway. The fifth one is show up, which is that personal accountability, step into the fray, be the leader when you need to be the leader, but also step back when you don't need to. How do you hold your team to account as well as show up and make decisions yourself? And then the final one is that the habit live to serve, what I call it live to serve, which is kind of the whole concept of servant leadership, but really how do I use my knowledge and expertise as a leader to help my team? And one of the things I always say to people I work with is your number one priority is to help your team be brilliant. So how do you use your talents and skills as a leader to help your team be brilliant? Because if you help your team be brilliant, you'll be brilliant by definition. So the live to serve habit is really kind of that encompassing.
Amazing. Focus. As you were saying them as well, I can obviously relate to every single one of them. But when you said about the find a way, that made me really chuckle inside, because that's a very military thing. Mm-hmm. I have really good conversations with ex-colleagues of mine who are still in, and we still go back for military get-togethers, etc. And it's the perception of, and again, rightly so, great, really good leadership and the heightened exposure you get to leadership. But it's very much a get things done, find a way. Like there are things that don't survive first contact, for example, or that punch in the face, the Mike Tyson thing. But the military are really good at adapting, and the people are trained and they're used to doing that. Find a way and make it happen, which isn't always pretty, but you develop and go from there. So awesome, thank you so much. We've got 3 minutes left. Time flies by. I want to just sort of put you on the spot a little bit and say, it sounds really positive, which it is, that all those that your story. I'm going to say about have you had any challenges or have you had any failure in your leadership journey that you've really learned from? And it comes across about your self-awareness, your situational awareness, which is all the things you've learned and been exposed to. But what experience have you had to sort of challenges or failures that you've had in your leadership journey?
So there's 2 that really come to mind. So the first one was it's not really a failure. I don't think that's the language to use, but I did have some mental health challenges. Yeah. So part of that step up that I had when I joined Coral and at the time that I was there is, whilst I was exposed to this great environment, I was learning a lot. There was also this real kind of self-doubt, and that started to really build into anxiety and panic disorder. And I was literally struggling most days to make it through the day without having panic attacks. And I know you're a big passionate advocate of looking after yourself. So I wasn't looking after myself. I wasn't physically well. I wasn't eating healthily. There was lots of things that were going on that weren't healthy. And that led to some issues. So that was something that I really had to battle through. And again, it's why I'm so passionate about mindset, because actually it was my mindset that wasn't right. And I needed to do the work on mindset to help me get through that. And I did. I've kind of come through that, and now fortunately, I don't suffer from those issues anymore. So that was kind of one big challenge that I had within my own leadership journey, and trying to still deliver a high quality job when you're privately going through all of those challenges. And of course, I'm a man, so I didn't tell anybody about it. So no, I'm massively, the speak up campaigns that we have now I'm so passionate about them because it's so important. And then from an entrepreneurial side is I made a really bad decision in my business a few years ago, where I invited somebody into the business, and really rather than invite them in as an employee, which is what I should have done, I invite them in as a partner, and actually we weren't matched on a value level. We got on really well. It was a colleague I used to work with. I thought he would offer something different to the business, but when it came to it, I didn't do the value level due diligence to make sure that we were aligned on a value set, and those values, as we grew into the business, they became more and more exposed as the gap between our values. And I'm a massive believer in the importance of values in a business and from a leadership perspective. And when those values don't match, it starts to become more and more apparent. And the harder things get, the find a way characteristic, when you're struggling, when you're having to fight for things, that's when you see the disparity in values really showing up. So that's probably the biggest mistake I've made, is a poor choice, which in the end set me back probably 18 months, 2 years in my business.
Yeah, amazing. And again, I was just thinking then, are we finishing on a negative? But I don't think we are. Like, that's really refreshing, and really kind of your whole journey then. I'm really pleased we've managed to get it into 20 minutes. We've sort of got it across everything and added so much value for the audience. So thank you so much for sharing that. So guys, that's it. Thank you so much for your time. If you've enjoyed this episode, make sure you pass it forward. Let me know across our social media platforms what you got from this episode. It really motivates me to find really amazing people with stories when you guys are getting added value. So make sure you hit subscribe on the YouTube channel. Make sure you follow us on your podcast provider. Every Wednesday at 6 a.m, we have amazing experts in their field and guests coming along to add value to your leadership journey. So Haydn, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Stuart. It's been great to join you.
And if you want to reach out to Haydn, we'll put all the links to his platforms. We'll put a link to the book, everything in there in the comments below. Make sure you go and say hi, connect, and go and check all his stuff out. So see you next week, guys. Take care. Bye.